In a world where we can connect thousands of services together, it is completely normal that things break. Mostly every software provider has their very own interpretation of how a webhook or an API has to be structured. So in the end, it is up to us and integration providers such as Make.com or Zapier to make sure that everything runs smoothly. And exactly that is also the case with Vapi. Creating a transient-based assistant can be pretty straightforward, but what if some error occurs and you hear stuff like couldn't fetch assistant? What do you do then? Well, in today's video, I'm going to explain to you the ins and outs of how you can debug inbound and outbound agents directly inside of Vapi in case they decide not to work. And at the end of the video, I'm also going to include some extra goodies on how you can debug function calling. Oh, and in case you don't know what a transient-based Vapi assistant is, I made a video about that right here, so you can check it out and get a better understanding of how Vapi actually works, what the infrastructure is, and how you can implement it into your business. It's definitely worth checking it out. Now, to get started, let's look at inbound agents first. So if you currently try to build an inbound agent, you have probably heard of the error message, couldn't fetch assistant. Exactly that happens when you try to create a transient-based assistant with values that are not supposed to be there or something is wrong within the configuration. This is as much of an error that you can get with the inbound calls, but imagine and wait what you can get with an outbound call, which is pretty much nothing at all. Well, there's a little bit of something, which I'm going to explain you. So while it looks like a dead end, Vapi actually implemented some features that we can use for our advantage to debug and understand what is actually wrong with the assistant that we created. So the methods to debug for inbound and outbound are fairly similar, even though that outbound has a little bit of more potential for errors than inbound has. All that can go wrong inside of your inbound agent is literally inside of the JSON construct that you provide as your transient-based assistant. So right here on my screen, I have a transient-based assistant that I've created from one of my previous videos. If you haven't seen it and you don't know exactly what that is, definitely check out my previous videos on how you can create those transient-based assistants easily and you can get a better understanding of them in the first place. I'll also link the video up right here and in the description below. So as you can see, this is literally a JSON construct and it contains some information that is not accepted by Vapi when creating a new assistant, and especially an inbound assistant that is based on a transient-based assistant. And to prove you that, I'm gonna show you that whole thing inside of a call. So all I'm going to do is I'll literally just run the scenario once, and I'm going to call this assistant from my phone so that you can actually see what happens when calling him.
Couldn't fetch assistant.
Exactly. So it couldn't fetch the assistant, which is the standard message that you get when the assistant couldn't be fetched or something is wrong inside of the connection. And to actually figure out what happens is a little bit complex if you don't know it. So we are going to straight dive into how to do that. And we are going to leverage some features inside of Vapi that just help us immensely on actually figuring out every single issue that is happening inside of the JSON that we created. And the easiest way of doing this is using a couple of tools, which I'm going to show you now. So obviously, first of all, we need the assistant JSON, which is this one right in here. I'm just copy this thing and I'm going to run it through a JSON editor. So this one is called jasoneditoronline.org. It is free and it basically just allows you to validate your JSON constructs. So I'm just going to paste it here and you can click on this little button to format it, which I've already done. So mine already looks clean, which is just easier to read. So in case you have a transient-based assistant that is literally minified, which then looks something like this, you can literally just format it by clicking on the button and you're good to go. So now, since we already understand the assistant better, I'm just going to use this whole thing with a tool called Postman, which basically allows us to debug and understand requests to see what's actually happening in between. And Vapi has a pretty cool endpoint, which is called Create Assistant, which basically allows us to create a static assistant on their direct platform, which obviously is nothing that we would like to do, right, if you think about it. But the beauty of it is that it actually shows you the error messages that you get when creating the assistant. So we can use that create assistant endpoint to basically figure out what is wrong inside of our actual assistant JSON that we created. So for doing that, I'm going to show you a couple of things. Number one is called Postman, which is basically the tool that I was talking about, which we can use to debug APIs. So you can simply create an account. It is completely for free. And if you've probably worked with APIs, you probably have one anyways. So the first thing we do is basically click on this little plus after you've created your account, which basically creates a temporary way of testing an API endpoint. So now what we're going to do is we head into the Vapi documentation, which you can do by going to Vapi and the docs, which opens a new tab. And inside of this new tab, we're going to API reference up here. And within the reference, we scroll down to the assistants and click on Create Assistant. So now you can see the whole definition of the assistant in a couple of languages. We don't mind much about the language, we just keep it at curl, but all we're going to do is we copy that URL, which is basically the endpoint that we would like to use for creating a static assistant on Vapi. So we paste that one right within the URL bar up here, and we keep that whole thing at, we're gonna change this thing to post, because Vapi basically requires a post request when creating an assistant. And as a data, you can see that they basically send over the whole assistant JSON. And this is exactly what we are going to do as well. So from the JSON editor, where you basically validated your JSON for better readability, you simply head into your Postman request. You click here on body, you go to raw, and it should usually select JSON by default. If it doesn't, you can select it from the dropdown. And we are going to paste that whole request right within here. So if I click send now, it basically sends a request to Vapi, which will be unauthorized because we haven't added our API key, which you will see right here. It says missing authorization header. So we basically are unauthorized and cannot create the assistant on our account. To fix that, we simply go to authorization. We're gonna select basic auth right here from the dropdown, and we are including our bearer token. So before clicking on basic auth, all I'm going to do is I head into my Vapi dashboard. I go to organization, which is a new menu item. So previously the API keys, they were located in the account. Now they are inside of the organization. So we simply click on it, and you can copy the API key with this little symbol right here. So now we head back to our Postman. We're going to select bearer token, and we're going to add our API key. Now once you select the bearer token, all you do is you basically paste this API key in the token field, and that is all you need to do. So now we head back to the body, and we are basically trying to create that assistant using the send button, which now in return gives us a message that tells us the exact issues that we are facing with this JSON generated assistant. So this transient based assistant. And as you can see here, it basically mentions 4 different issues. So there are 4 problems inside of my JSON that Vapi has a problem with or does not want to see inside of the JSON, which is that a property ID should not exist, org ID should not exist, created and updated that should not exist. I specifically left it at this exact example because I have previously created another video where I listed a temporary or a transient-based assistant that is super easy to configure using a simple make.com template, which uses a similar structure like that. So what I basically do is I'm stripping away those values, which is the exact same thing I'm going to do right here. So it basically mentions that ID, org ID, created at, and updated at are not allowed. So you can see them right within your JSON now since you formatted it, which is ID, org ID, created at, and updated at. So all I have to do to make it work is basically remove those values, and I'm going to keep updated at just to show you that those error messages will now disappear, except of the one for updated at, since I have not removed it. And that is the correct thing, so it says not updated at should not exist. So I'm going to remove the same thing again. And now you can also see inside of Vapi, when I go inside of my dashboard, sorry, right here, I currently have 2 assistants, which are called Sarah and Lisa. And if I'm going to create the assistant now, you will see that it basically returns me a fully valid assistant, including the ID. And if I head back into my Vapi dashboard and I click on assistants again, you can see that it basically created a duplicate of that assistant. So that worked just well, which means now this assistant is actually functional, it works. And now I can basically just use this whole JSON that we have here and put it back into from wherever I basically call this transient-based assistant. So right in here, I can basically just keep it in this minified version, which is okay for me. Obviously, if you don't want that, you can format it within here again. And this is literally it. So now we already managed and figured out how to validate those transient-based assistants, which is the exact same thing for the outbound calls as well. So in case you do an outbound call and it might not be working, this might be one option for you to actually check if the assistant itself is working, if everything is configured the right way. While the structure is fairly similar both for inbound and outbound agent to test and debug that assistant JSON in general, there is another aspect that you can test for outbound agent that basically tells you a little bit more if stuff works or not. So now I'm going to show you exactly for outbound agents how you can actually figure out if something works or not. And there are two basic ways that I'm usually explaining, especially to us or to my customers as well. And one is usually using Postman and the other one is using make.com. So if we are basically heading back into their documentation, where you probably have been if you have created an outbound agent in the first place, you will find an endpoint called create phone call, which is this one right here. And as you can see on the right, you can basically send along either an assistant ID, which then would take a static assistant from within your Vapi assistants, or you can also define a transient-based assistant right here that basically contains that whole structure of that assistant JSON. So to actually debug that and see if that works and if something works or doesn't work, we are going to use the first example, make.com, to create a phone call. So I'm going to use the exact same setup. I'm basically just copying this URL to create a phone call. I'm going to head into Postman. I click on the plus, I add the URL, the endpoint right within here. And if I look into here now, it basically says it also requires a post call. So I'm going to switch the post method to post, or that request method to post. And now we have again the body where we basically need to define all of the information. Before I'm going to do this, I also just quickly select the bearer token as an authorization header so that we have also set up authorization for this specific endpoint. All right, I've done that and just headed back to the body tab. So now we click again on raw and we select JSON from the dropdown. And now we can configure the dynamic JSON that we basically would use for creating an outbound call. So based on the documentation, as you can see here, it contains a JSON that has a couple of values. It has an assistant key, which basically contains the transient-based assistant. In our case, we're not going to use assistant ID because we don't have a static one. Max duration seconds, I'm not going to define. I just leave it at the default. And if we're scrolling down to the very end, you can also see a couple of more fields, which is metadata, phone number ID, and here customer and customer ID. So customer ID we don't have, since we basically just cold call some person that we basically have from a lead list. You can also see an example for that in my previous videos. So we are going to use customer, which means we create a temporary customer on demand in that moment where we're calling him, which means we have the customer number added here and the customer name added here. So what I'm going to do is I basically just copy this whole JSON block right here, and I'm going to paste this exact same thing into the JSON editor. And now I'm just removing this transient-based assistant right here, because this is one that is just from the documentation, and we don't want to have this inside of our assistant. So this is the part I'm going to remove. And all I'm going to do is I'm basically just taking that assistant that we created earlier, or basically whatever outbound assistant you have, and you're just going to paste it right within here. So now we have a basic demo request that I could use to send out custom information. I'm just going to remove the customer ID and the other values that I don't want to set, which are those, and which is also the phone number ID. Or the phone number ID we can actually leave because we have the phone number, so we don't need to temporarily create an assistant phone number. So I'm just going to remove this part as well. And I'm also going to remove that last part. Boom. Okay, so now we also need to set up a phone number ID, which is the one that we can get from the phone number that we have purchased inside of Vapi. Just gonna head quickly over to the phone numbers tab, and I'm going to copy the phone number ID, which is right here. So I'm gonna paste that part within this part in here. And for the customer, we can now set up a number. In that case, I'm going to use my number. So I will just be hiding this number for a moment, so you will not see it. Okay, so I basically added my number to the JSON construct. So I'm going to copy this whole thing. And I basically just added inside of Postman into the body, which is right here. And now since we have the assistant right within here, we can basically give it a try and call that phone number, which means if I click on it, it should receive a call on my phone if everything is configured the right way. All right, that does it. So it created the phone call, and I should now see on my phone a call coming in from that agent, which you can see right here. So it works. Now the agent is coming through and we have a valid JSON that basically works. So let's say you have something wrong inside of the JSON that you basically created for your outbound calling assistant, like for example, missing the number, like I did right here. I'm just going to copy this broken version of the assistant. I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to click send. And now you can see that there comes an arrow back, which is exactly what you see inside of Postman, which basically defines where the problem is, so you can directly see it inside of the Postman response. So if you basically have an assistant created on your very own platform or on a different provider where you make the phone call from, whatever kind of CRM or automation platform that is, can be any kind of platform, it is sometimes hard to see the responses. So using a tool like Postman allows you to see the exact arrows that are coming back inside of the response, so that you can get a better idea of what's going wrong. Now the other way I'm going to show you how you can actually figure that out inside of make.com. We are going to use the same broken assistant, and let's assume we have a new make.com scenario. So we just ignore the fact that this one is a different scenario. I'm just going to use an HTTP call to make a request where we basically want to now create the transient-based assistant directly inside of make.com. So let's say we have a body type that is set to raw. Within here, we set the content type to JSON. We paste this whole big block right within here that basically has a missing phone number, and we're gonna click on parse response yes, because that's always nice for you to debug and read the actual content, which again helps you just to make things a little bit easier when debugging in general. We're gonna switch the request method back to post, and inside of the URL we're going to copy the exact same URL that we used as an endpoint from within the Vapi documentation right up here. Okay, I'm gonna head in, paste this URL. And now we also need to define the header. So let's say you want to create this call inside of Make. We will probably have a authorization header, and this one is set to bearer, space, and then your API key. So I'm just going to paste the API key right within here. And once you've done that, you simply click OK. So if I'm going to run this module now, you basically are able to see as well a response, which is what you see up in the bubble right here. And if you click on it, you can see at the bottom it shows a status code 400, which means there was an error inside of the configuration. So if you have a successful creation of a call, this would show a 200 or 200 plus, so something in the 200 range, which basically means that the request was accepted and it was processed properly. But if you see a status code 400 or anything above, you know that there is an error inside of your configuration. And you can click on the data button right here, which then again shows you that it was a bad request, and inside the messages, you can again see the same message that you would see inside of Postman. So that again helps you to figure out where exactly the issue is. So here you can see it says customer.number must be a valid phone number. And as you can see inside of the JSON that we created earlier, we have removed the phone number right here. So that is the correct thing. So this is just a little tip on how you can understand, even with like no-code or low-code tools, how to actually debug responses so that you can see what is going wrong and how you can easily fix that without spending hours inside their documentation and trying to figure things out. So if you're still watching, you're most likely very serious about building AI voice agents, and here I'm going to drop another goodie for you that helps you to understand better how you can actually debug function calling or tool calling inside of Vapi. So if you don't know exactly what tool calling is, it is basically the possibility of giving your assistant access to extra features that they can leverage within and during the call. So let's, for example, say you would like to get the weather during a call, or you would like to schedule a meeting. You can do this directly inside the call, and you don't have to wait until the call is at the end, and you can then take the transcript, run that through OpenAI to figure out whatever kind of appointment they want to book, which again just allows you to extend that stuff and make the bot more sophisticated, just better, because you can even tell the user back that the meeting couldn't be scheduled because there's already another meeting at this exact time. So, you just have a more smooth user experience overall. And creating functions and doing function calling with Vapi is another whole topic that I'm going to cover in another video. But for now, I'm just going to show you how you can debug that. And if you have worked with Vapi before, you will know that inside of their dashboard, inside of the assistants, you can basically head to functions and create your own custom functions right here. And you can add a server URL right within this field. So I'm not going to set up everything, but you probably know that when you create a function, you have to give it a name. So let's say get weather, and then you have to also define what it does. Gets the weather for a specific country, for example, or for a specific city, let's say. And then you can add properties. So we can say something like city name, and you can give it a more description about what the property actually is about. This is the city name. So then you can basically use whatever kind of API you have to connect it inside of the server URL to get the weather for that specific city. The thing is, when you add your server URL right within here and you call the assistant and the assistant is not able to fetch that information because of some error that might be, maybe your URL is not authenticated, maybe it is broken, maybe something doesn't work from the server side in the first place, so maybe the server is off, or anything that happens in between of fetching the information, like fetching the information about the weather and sending it back, it is very hard to debug because it happens asynchronous during the call, so you cannot exactly see what the response is. So what I generally do is that I'm going to use a tool called hook.site, which basically allows me to get insights into the actual response and the data that is transferred in between. If you would have a function like this, so all you do is you head over to hook.site and it will create for you a dynamic URL that looks something like this. So you can simply copy this one to the clipboard, you head into your Vapi assistant, and you simply paste this one into the server URL field right here. So I'm just gonna test this with you. What I'm going to do is I click save, so we have set up the city name. This whole thing is published, so there's nothing to worry from my side. I'm just going to change something else. Just going to change this. I'm going to publish this whole function just to make sure the function is actually added, because I had it before and Vapi had some issues that the functions weren't added. So I assume after refreshing this one should be there just to make sure. Alright, so there was in fact an issue with my internet, so it didn't save it. So what I did is I basically just recreated this whole thing with a get weather request. I set the description, I set the property, I added the server URL for hook.site, I click save, and I'm just going to edit this as well just to make sure we can publish that whole function again. So let's just quickly do that. And this worked, so I'm just going to refresh just to make sure that the function actually has been saved. Okay, so I basically forgot to click on add, so I have just simply recreated this whole function with the get weather, and we have a property called city, which I set to the city we get the weather for. So this function is now basically there. I'm going to publish that whole thing which means the assistant function is right here and it should be now available inside of our assistant. So all I'm going to do is I'm literally just going to give this assistant a call and try to call this function, which then in return, whenever I call this function, sends a request to webhook.site where we can see the exact response that was sent over. So let's give this one a try. Alright, we're just gonna call the assistant and see if we actually can manage to call that function.
Hello, this is Lisa. How may I assist you today?
Hey Lisa, can you tell me the current weather in London?
Hold on a sec. I'm sorry, but it seems that I'm unable to retrieve the current weather for London at the moment.
So as you can see, we managed basically to send over the function call and webhook.site received that information, including the whole information about the call. So you can see here that it basically sends a function call request as you would usually get it for a function call. And you can see that we get back the information that basically the properties that we defined. So it said city London, which is the exact one. Get weather is basically the function name that we gave it. So until here, we already know that the function is actually called and we can see the exact data that is right within here. I'm not going to scroll down because there's a little bit more information about my phone number, etc. But you get the hang of it. So you can see the information that comes through here. And now if you, let's say, this is one part, obviously, this is for the assistant to request the information for that function call, but there's also the other side where you basically do whatever you do inside of that function call and then return the information back to this exact same call. And to debug that, you can also use webhook.site as the same starting point. The only thing that you now make different is that you actually add your very own endpoint right within the function call right here or inside of your transient-based assistant, and you add the webhook.site request wherever you need it inside of your very own code, or if it is a make.com scenario that you use to create the function call response, you can add it as well there. So webhook.site just in general helps you to understand external requests that are not directly or like not synchronous, but asynchronous. So you can see them even if they don't happen at that exact time where you have anything else to debug with. Which is exactly why I like webhook.site so much. So the tool is completely for free. You don't even need to create an account. You simply head to webhook.site and you will get a URL that you can then use either for the message that comes, so the function call that comes from Vapi, or even from within your own code where you basically do whatever and return that information back to the function call. Obviously, if you use something like make.com, you can even just run that scenario once and check out what happens in the meantime when this function is called, which again gives you just more insights into debugging. But obviously if you use make.com, I assume you know that already. So for now, that is all I have to show you. I hope this video was helpful for you and you learned something new. I will definitely make more content about Vapi and its features so that you can make the most out of your very own assistants that you create on their platform. And in case there's anything else you would like me to make for you so that you can see it and get a better understanding of it, simply drop it down below in the comments. I'm very happy to help you out. And that's it for now. Until next time, see you soon.